This is Ricki Spencer and welcome to Quests by Community. Today we have a special guest. We have somebody who's very passionate about elders' rights. And we're having a sensitive topic today, something that impacts our community, and we want to make sure that everybody is aware of the importance of valuing and respecting our older community, especially within our LGBTIQ community. I have the absolute pleasure today of welcoming Debra Nicholl. She is the Elders Rights Advocate CEO. Ms. Nicholl has worked for ERA, which provides information and support to older people, their families and representatives in Victoria for more than 17 years. Over that time, she has worked as an advocate, senior educator, advocacy manager, programs manager and deputy CEO. Welcome, Debra, to our show today.
Thank you so much, Ricki. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's begin the journey. What got you interested in working in this space, the Elders' Rights Advocacy?
Ricki, this will give away my age. I started working in aged care back in the mid-70s. I was a teenager at the time. My mother was managing an aged care facility in Queensland, and I really think it was to just, keep me busy on the weekends. She said, "Come on, I need a bit of help." And I went into the facility and started working in the kitchen, helping out in the kitchen, and then helping out just, cleaning rooms and what have you. So really, grassroots work. But it was the conversations that I had with older people in that residential aged care facility that really captured me. I found them incredibly interesting. I didn't have a lot of older people in my life, and I think I appreciated that. I probably couldn't have told you that at the time, but now when I look back on it, to have older people in the lives of younger people and to share their wisdom and to mentor younger people and just to share stories, what it used to be like. It was interesting to me then. It was interesting to me throughout my direct work with older people. And of course, now in my current role, I don't get to do so much face-to-face work with older people, but I'm certainly still there making sure that their stories and experiences count. So working on systemic advocacy issues with the government and through the Older Persons Advocacy Network.
Just hearing that it's interesting because I remember like in the 70s and 80s, and I guess I was a child and a teenager, elderly was something I thought of as happening to some group of people and they were somehow put into a nursing home. Has that perception changed of what elderly means in our society today?
I don't think so, Ricki. I think, look, I'm clearly no spring chicken myself. As soon as my hair turned grey, I noticed I became invisible. People do not treat you the same way as you age. We do not appreciate, a wrinkly face. We're always trying to change it. And I recognise my own internal ageism here. I look in the mirror and go, oh, my Lord. But wouldn't it be nice if we had a society where we actually appreciated ageing and we saw those wrinkles and those lines as signs of wisdom and experience? No, I don't think that we appreciate older people. And I think that ageism and age discrimination is something that we do need to raise and battle within ourselves and within society generally.
For some people listening to us today, their first indications that there was such a thing as elderly abuse perhaps stemmed from the reports from the Royal Commission, that was tabled. Can you probably enlighten us as to what does constitute elderly abuse? Like, what is it?
Well, Ricki, there are many different forms of elder abuse, emotional, social, psychological abuse, and of course physical and sexual abuse, unfortunately, also constitute elder abuse. But it's any act that is perpetrated against an older person by someone who is in a position of trust, and of course, as I say, can take many forms. The most common form is financial abuse, and we've seen it more and more over more recent years as a form of inheritance impatience, where we hear from older people or family members who will say things like, mum or dad doesn't need it anymore. We need that money. They don't need to be living in that big house. We need it. So it is that impatience for people to get their hands on the money that they might see the older person is holding. And it can be intentional in that, yes, we are deliberately going to act in a way that is fraudulent and gain benefit financially from the older person, or it can be unintentional. I'm an only child, it's mine when mum or dad dies, I will inherit everything. So I have a right to that money now.
And I think this is important because some people may say, "Oh, well, they're old. I'm only telling them off because they don't understand." Do you find that sometimes people dismiss or minimize the fact that yelling at an older person because it's their mum, they have a right to do that?
I definitely think that happens. I've heard it myself within my own family, getting annoyed with someone. The older person might have some cognitive impairment and the other person is getting annoyed and they start yelling. Yes, that is a form of psychological abuse. Absolutely. I've heard it when I've gone into some aged care facilities where staff will be, hurry up, you're taking too much time. I've got other people that I have to look after. Of course, that is also a form of psychological abuse. And older people tell us daily how that sort of abuse makes them feel useless, worthless. It absolutely has a psychological impact, and it is absolutely not okay.
And I think the other part I'd like you to perhaps comment on is that when you see people or in residential settings where staff talk to older people as though they're children.
Yeah, no, that's it, Ricki. Oh, sweetie, darling, love. I do it a bit myself. I'll say, oh, yes, darling, yes, love. But older people, again, tell us, I want to be called by my name. It's respectful to speak to me by my name and to speak to me as if I fully understand the conversation that we're having. I'm not a child. And yet, as an older person, I'm now being treated like a child, or often in residential care, we hear I'm treated like someone with dementia. Of course, there are a number of people living in residential care who suffer from dementia, but that doesn't mean that everybody does. And it doesn't mean that because you are older that you either have a hearing impairment and that you need to be yelled at, or that people need to speak down to you for you to understand. Most older people, as we know, have come from a background where they've lived their lives, they've engaged in society, they've held jobs, their understanding and their knowledge is great. So most certainly we do not need to speak down to them.
And I guess one of the issues that being, our show here, Quest by Community, and with a focus on the LGBTIQ community, we hear stories where sometimes because of the times that people have lived in, they could not affirm themselves or be in relationships where they felt their heart was, and so that they married, into heterosexual lifestyles, and then later in life divorced, and then pursued the relationship the way they wanted to. Have you come across any cases where older people perhaps that are being harassed by their families because they don't accept their elder person having a relationship, and I guess with the same sex partner or trans or even a cisgendered uh, relationship, that soon as you get to a certain age, it's expected the person becomes non-physical, non-sexual. They deem it as somehow it's exploited.
So many examples, Ricki, of members of the LGBTIQA plus community who come to us for advocacy support because they're not understood or respected by staff within aged care facilities, but often it's the other residents who will have particular views and ideas that makes the person feel very uncomfortable. But same-sex relationships, where we have to work with staff to understand that a person's partner is their partner and their chosen representative. It is not appropriate to ask, oh, do you have a child or a wife or a husband who can make those decisions for you if there's some sort of cognitive issue going on. So to respect relationships of choice, absolutely. I've also had a case myself where I've helped someone who was transitioning, and through that transition they had a health emergency. They'd ended up in residential aged care. They were no longer able to continue with the transition process. And when I went in to visit, the person was dressed in a black tracksuit, haircut really, really short, lips very dry, and I'll never forget that. I had to get out my own lip balm at that point to help the person and have the conversation with staff that this is not how this person wants to be seen in the world or to dress. I looked in their wardrobe and everything was just dowdy old tracksuits, something the person would not have chosen themselves, but that the family had supplied, and the family were quite happy in this particular case that the transition could no longer go ahead. So we will always advocate for the individual's right to be who they are and express themselves in the way that they are most comfortable, in recognition that we are all diverse, in our culture, in our beliefs, in our sexuality, in how we want to present in the world, and absolutely we support that. I have many stories, Ricki, but we're there for all older Victorians and to support their diversity and for them to be treated as an individual.
So wonderful to hear. And perhaps that's a point I really want to again re-emphasize. So if you you have a relative or a friend or a partner who's a part of the LGBTIQ community, and you suspect or you've witnessed someone not being well respected, or their wishes not being affirmed in we'll first mention a residential setting. What's the process? Like, I see something happening and I'm really upset. What do I do?
Well, I would encourage you to call us on 1800 700 600. Then you will speak with one of our intake advocates, and they are advocates. They are very highly trained professionals who can provide you with information and then the sort of assistance that you might want. So we won't do or say anything without the permission of the older person or their representative. But we will certainly provide information about how people can proceed to provide assistance. And then it's, again, up to the person who calls us. Either information, fine, off you go. You're empowered with that information to go off and make informed decisions or provide information to others, or we can provide direct advocacy assistance. So an advocate can stand beside you and help you raise your voice, make sure it is heard and that your rights are supported, because everyone does have rights under the Aged Care Act. There is a Charter of Aged Care Rights, and those rights are about having your voice heard, being able to make complaint without the fear of reprisal, being respected as an individual and receiving person-centred care.
Can I ask you on that point too, Deb, for people who are listening, if they find themselves in a situation where their partner or their friend or relative has to go into a respite space or into a residential setting, can they have that conversation to the staff that, look, my friend is someone who is affirming their transgender. Can you please respect that and their pronouns, or they're in a same-sex relationship? Is that something that all spaces have to adhere to, or is it up to the individual residential setting as to whether they would accept that?
No, it absolutely is. It's vital that those who are providing the care understand who the person is and how the person would like the care to be provided and who is their chosen representative, or in some cases care partner, so someone who might come in and help provide that care. It is a vital conversation to be had, and all aged care providers must respect that and provide care that meets that individual's not only assessed needs, but choices and preferences. Now, that can be difficult in a situation where you might have over 100 people all living under the same roof, but particularly when it comes to a person's diversity, providers need to accommodate that, respect it, and make sure that people feel safe and comfortable in their care. And I think safety is a big issue here. People do need to feel safe. And I have heard people say to me, I would rather kill myself than go into residential aged care. That is not acceptable for someone to feel that way, although I appreciate that they do and why they might. And that is exactly why advocates like us exist. It's to make sure that the power imbalance is addressed and that someone's standing beside you, and it doesn't have to be an advocate like myself or one of my colleagues. It's the person of your choosing to stand beside you, and it's to, as I say, address that imbalance and make the person feel more empowered and safer in that environment.
That kind of now leads me on to the other example I wanted to ask, is to say, what do we do if we have a friend that we see or a couple we see, and we notice that the partner discloses to us that the other person is forcing them to have sex and they don't want to have sex, and they feel that they can't say no. What do you suggest that in that scenario that we consider to do?
It is always about making sure the person has the information that they need to be able to reach out for support. So it's very easy for us to say, well, you can say no. It is not that easy in some cases. But if the person has the information available to them about what supports are out there, then again, it's about empowerment. They can feel more empowered to say no and know that they have the support to be able to do that and feel safe in that process. So again, I would encourage them to give us a call. If it isn't something that we can directly help the person with, then we will find someone who can, and we will make warm referrals. So not just go, here's a phone number, off you go, give them a call. We will stand by the person through the process of finding that support that they need.
Another topic which I think is important that we discuss here, what does financial abuse constitute?
So it could be something from putting pressure on the older person. I just need, I don't have any money, I've got kids, I need a bit of help with the groceries, putting pressure on them so they feel like, I must help you with this, all the way through to putting a piece of paper in front of someone who is unwell or threatening in some way, sign this or else you won't see your grandchildren, or else I won't come and help you anymore. And then the older person finds that they have signed a legal authority by way of a power of attorney that gives another person some authority to make financial decisions for them. So coercion in that way, or it could just be someone, and we've certainly had this, in relation to staff coming in to help older people in the home, who take the older person shopping and say, my children really love those biscuits. Will you get the packet of those biscuits for your children? No, that's not for the older person to purchase, or for them to feel under any pressure to do so. The right response in that is, thank you so much, that is very generous, but no.
I think that's so important, Deborah. Thank you for highlighting that, because this is something we're working hard in the disability space, that we need with boundary settings. Do you feel like, when we're speaking about this, that there needs to be better training for those working in residential spaces to understand intersectionality, but also boundaries about working with older people holistically?
I think absolutely across the board in aged care, we need to be developing a more professionalised workforce. So that's a workforce that is not just minimally trained, but are thoroughly trained in all aspects of providing care. And that absolutely includes understanding intersectionality, trauma-informed care, absolute boundary setting. You are a professional, and when your professional hat is on, you don't cross those boundaries. Even if you're going into someone's home and providing very personal care, it does not entitle you to cross any boundaries. So this speaks to the training and development of a professional workforce in recognition of the fact that providing care and services to older people or people with a disability is not just something you do because you've got a good heart and you like to help people. It's a profession in a highly complex field where you have to be very knowledgeable, not only about clinical issues, but about emotional, social, psychological issues.
And in your work, where you are, what you're at the moment, Folk, have you looked at examples in other countries if they do things differently?
We have, Ricki, we have, and I think they do. Look, in some countries they do better than us in one area and yet not in another area. So equitable access, depending on what your financial situation is, for example, doesn't work so well in the UK and in America. It works better here, where we have a user pays, more money you have, more money you will pay. But if you don't have that money, then the care and service that you receive should be equal to everyone else. Of course, it might determine where you can live, but the care and services should be exactly the same. But in other countries, they have a better understanding about rights and human rights and respecting the human rights of the older person. We're very keen to see, and it certainly was a Royal Commission recommendation, an Aged Care Act that is based on the human rights of older people, not premised on a partnership of care. That's important, but it is more important that the legislation is premised on basic human rights. The older person's right to safe, equitable care and services provided by a trained, competent workforce. The same rights that we would all expect to have respected within the healthcare system, for example.
One of my passion areas is on accessibility and looking at universal design. Do you feel that we still have a long way to go in terms of how we build residential spaces for people? And what sort of things would you like to see changed in planning for those spaces?
Absolutely, we've got a long way to go. It comes to mind a new aged care facility that I visited some years ago now. And, the spiel was it was architecturally designed by aged care specialist architects. And then they couldn't actually get the beds into the rooms because the doors weren't wide enough. So I thought, yes, interesting. And the corridors, weren't wide enough for two walkers to go side by side, that sort of thing. I think the days for consultation about these things are over, and we really have to start looking at co-design. I want to hear from the people who need to use these facilities. I want to know what they need, what older people need, what people with a disability need. So they are part of that co-design process. And I'm always heartened when aged care providers say, oh, we're going to spruce the facility up. And we've asked the residents, what colours do you want? What fabric do you want? What flooring do you want? What do you want it to look like? Simple things, but as we know in our own home, we decide those things. They're not decided for us. We don't live in spaces where we have no input. So it is all about co-design, and I think on all levels of care provision, if the people receiving that care are included in the co-design, we will see a much better system and one that is more suited for purpose.
One of the other issues that in the work that I do, I find that more and more older women are finding it difficult to find sustainable and affordable housing, and health begins to deteriorate more so quicker because you don't have secure housing. In the projection of the supply of residential spaces in the future in Australia, do we need to invest more in providing residential spaces and infrastructure to accommodate our aging population?
I think we need to invest more in creative thinking and ideas about how we accommodate people in general, but particularly older people. We would really like to see the deinstitutionalisation of aged care. So not the building of, 2-3 story facilities with long corridors and lots of rooms. Yes, we've come a long way. We no longer have like a hospital ward where you'll have half a dozen beds and half a dozen toilets and showers in a row. Of course, we have gone beyond that, but we need to go beyond the deinstitutionalisation so we don't have, one vulnerable cohort all under one roof. And COVID has shown the problems associated with that. And that's just one of the problems associated with that. So I definitely think we need to invest in more accommodation generally, but looking at what that might be that, again, better suits the needs of older people. So cottage-style accommodations, group settings where people can live individually but have care and support come in and be shared by that group. And we often hear in aged care, people saying, I don't get on with this one or that one. I prefer to stay in my room because I really don't like this communal living. We don't all get along. We want to be able to choose who we live with, and that's no different as you get older. And certainly for older women who are the most vulnerable, we know that they don't have the same financial support in their old age as older men. They often cannot become re-employed in the same way if that's what they choose to do. So they're just not in as good a position. They absolutely need to be able to have some choice in the sort of accommodations that are available to them. It isn't good enough for us to just build big facilities, say, here's a room, off you go, you go and live in it. That's not a healthy ageing society. That's not one I want to be part of. No, I've got skin in the game now. I am ageing, and God willing, we will all be ageing. The only alternative is that we aren't here at all. So I think it is a question not just for older people but for younger people to consider as well. What sort of a society do we want to build? And that we look to how we treat our older people, and certainly how we help accommodate older people, needs to be looked at now by all of us.
And I think on that sort of line, I'd like to encourage people from our community, LGBTIQ community, especially trans and gender diverse young people, to consider careers in aged care, because it's so important to connect with those who are like us and to provide support so that older people who are vulnerable can see a connection. Is that, as we're threading towards the end of this wonderful conversation, would you like to add any points to that?
I totally agree, Ricki. We want to encourage young people to see aged care as a viable professional alternative. I've worked with a lot of, and I've worked the floor. I've worked the floor in aged care. I've worked in support work in people's homes. And it's always a job on the way to another job because it's not professionalised. But I've certainly spoken to a lot of young nurses who say, I'm doing this for my placement, but no, I don't want to work in aged care. You don't get as much money and you don't, it's not as sexy a job, it's not as interesting a job. But it is complex clinical care. It is complex psychological care for the older person. And I really believe if we do professionalise it and we pay people properly, that we will attract all manner of young people into the industry. But for the transgender community, I've only worked in all my years with one transgender woman who was just the best person to work with, in that she was so gorgeous and warm, and the residents just loved her to bits. It was a wonderful experience for all of us who worked with her, and I would absolutely encourage people from the community to get involved in aged care service delivery. I think it will change. It has to change. The Royal Commission has identified the need for the change, but as we know, it takes time. It takes time, and it takes a shift in not only political will but community attitude. So we've all got to be on that journey together and, continue to raise awareness of these issues. So I thank you, Ricki, for that.
Debra Nicholl, it's been an absolute pleasure spending some time with you on Quests by Community today. I've learned so much, and I'm sure our viewers have learned so much about the important work you do and your organisation, and we look forward to hearing from you again and join the advocacy into making sure that elders' rights are foremost in our minds in everything we do.
Thank you so much, Ricki. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to your viewers. I hope that there is some good information there. And, of course, remember to call us on 1800 700 600. We are there for you if you need us. So thank you so much.